Today, I'm here with nutritionist Kallie Kitas, founder of KK Nutrition, to discover an approach to nutrition that creates food and body freedom. Kallie, I don't know if you want to start by telling us a little bit more about what KK Nutrition is and how your approach to helping people optimize their health and well-being through food differs from other nutritionists.
Thank you for having me firstly. I think what KK Nutrition is about is we kind of just help women, or we empower women in a way that, they end the fight and the battle between their food and their body, because there's such heavy attachment on their worth and their value based on a number on a scale, or how they look and how they feel, that they literally just, getting stuck into this cycle, and it's just filled with all these insecurities. And then instead of using food as something that's enjoyable and that helps them to feel good, it ends up being like an enemy to them, and they're not reaping the full benefits of it. And I think how I differ from others, I suppose, is that instead of just looking as like, oh, here's a meal plan, here's a supplement, and here you go, it's kind of like, no, let's just go on a deeper level, and we're going to change your behavior around food and just take a deep dive in why they do, what are their actions behind all that, how do they feel, how do they think, because there's such a disconnection between their thoughts and their actions that I don't think there's many people that actually help to connect the dots for them, and a lot of the times that they're on autopilot with their eating patterns. So I think the difference between me is just basically helping them shift their behavior, not if you look at someone's Google Drive and you type in diet plans, there's probably like 10 of them in their Google Drive, right? And I think it's like the stats are like adults do like 5 diets per year, and yet they're still lost and confused and stuck on what to do with nutrition. They still don't know what to eat and what works for them. And so it's really about just connecting their behavior and then shifting their behavior in their subconscious mind, so then they can finally reach, their body health and image goals, but in a more empowering way where it doesn't sabotage them and, they lose their marbles, so to speak, in the process. So yeah, that sums it up.
That's kind of one of the key reasons I wanted to speak to you, because I think a lot of doctors will talk about the relationship between, whether on the kind of psychological or the medical side, we'll talk about the emotional relationship that we have with food. And we know, for example, that things like trauma can affect our gut, but we also know, for example, that we will eat more or eat less when we're anxious. And I think that kind of emotional relationship to food getting to quite an unhealthy place is something that a lot of women experience. I think we're told all the time, eat this, don't eat that. Like you say, there are 100,000 different diets out there to kind of help you feel perfect or look perfect, rather than actually sitting down and thinking, okay, well, why do I eat in this way, or what works for me food wise? And so I think it's really incredible that you take that approach. I think it's quite unique. And I wanted to ask you, what inspired you to take this approach to nutrition and found KK Nutrition in the first place?
It's just because of my past struggles. Like, I mean, when I was, going back a few years ago, like I was a massive gym junkie. And so I wasn't really good academically in school. So sports kind of took over. And then I found myself, as I then started going to the gym, I started getting really caught up on like body image, and I had to be a certain body fat percentage, and because I was like the nutritionist at a few gyms, and at that time I was a sprinter, so I had quite an athletic build, unintentionally, just because of my training being at that time a sprinter. And it was the whole that everyone had a thing for my legs, because with sprinters we train legs so much, it's always about our legs. And I thought, oh my God, how am I going to change my body? Because people are associating me as being this nutritionist, and, I've got these set of legs. So I had to maintain this specific body image, because if I changed, even if I just went up like 500 grams of weight, it would really do my head in, because I'm like, oh my God, what are they going to think of me? They're going to think I'm a crappy nutritionist and I'm not walking my talk. And so I had that part with body image struggles. and not being good enough, looking a certain way. And even though I had that body, I still felt so insecure. It's a lot of people think that once they reach that body that then they'll be happy, and I'm like, no, you actually feel 10 times more insecure than what you do when you don't have that body, which people don't really understand until they get to that situation. And then the binge eating part kind of came also because, you know, I mean, even me being an expert in it, and I did 4 years at uni studying this nutrition, it was kind of like I got taught nutrition a very specific way. And then you just, because it's so strict and so narrow-minded, I feel like nutrition's always like black and white, like you got to be doing this way and not that way. And it just got to a point where I'm just like, this is getting ridiculous, because then I would feel really bad eating like a piece of fruit. Like I didn't eat nectarines for like 4 years because I was conditioned to think that fruits are bad and sugar's bad, and you know, even the sugar in fruit's going to cause cancer. And so that was what was conditioning me. But then I found myself, you know, being really strict in the morning and then binge eating by the nighttime because I had restricted my intake so much. And because I was so, even for myself, so conflicted by the messaging, and even having studied this, I was still like lost and confused in the process. And it just got to a point, like I struggled with this battle for like 10 years before I'm just like, this is getting ridiculous. I need to find my own, I had to like pause and take out everyone out of the equation and just do something on my own and just do my own research and what aligns with my values. And, you know, I had to do a whole heap of therapy work and stuff, but it was literally just all from the fitness industry and or the weight loss industry and what they get taught in black and white approach. And it just, I don't think that industry understands how much it can impact someone's mental health. And there's so much disordered eating going behind the scenes that no one talks about because it's such an embarrassing thing to admit. That you can eat like a whole large pizza and like a bag of chips and like a tub of ice cream, you know, all in like one sitting. It's like you can sit there telling your best friend and just sit there bragging about it because you're going to feel like you're getting judged, and it's embarrassing and there's a lot of shame. But yeah, that's the cycle that I kind of got caught up in. And it was just a really toxic, messy cycle, and it feels impossible to get out of, but you can. But it just all began just going through this process of and so I have a lot of empathy and compassion for people who go through it, which is why I created KK Nutrition, because I really feel for people who go through this, and because there's so much silence around it, that there's not many really people talking about it, that I kind of wanted to create like a space where there's a space where no one's getting judged. You can be who you are, and you're going to get education that has like a no BS approach where it's sustainable and practical. So you can actually do it for the remainder of your life, not, you know, just do this diet and then 30 days later you're stopping it, but then you're binging and then going back to old habits kind of thing. So yeah, that's how it all kind of began.
There are a few things there that really, really resonated with me. I think I'd like to start with kind of that point you made around when you reach a goal weight or a certain body type. I think there are a lot of assumptions from a personal perspective, and this is something that I certainly have experienced, that when you get to that point, you'll immediately be happy. You won't feel any insecurities. You won't, you won't feel insecure anymore. But the reality of what happens is, like you say, there develops this pressure to continue to look a certain way, and that can actually push you into a further kind of unhealthy cycle. So when I was a kid, I was always like a bigger kid, not in a negative way. I just was, and I loved food. I always have. I'm a big food still. And I ended up losing quite naturally weight in my sort of early 20s. It was just kind of, I guess, like hormonal, puppy fat, whatever, no problem. And all of a sudden, people were looking at me entirely differently. And there was consistent commentary on my physique, the way I looked. And that drove me, that combined with other factors ended up driving me into an eating disorder, because I was so afraid of not looking the way that now people were telling me was the way that I should look. and the way that I looked better or was valued more, that it drove me into such an unhealthy cycle. And I think that's something that a lot of women experience, and men to some extent. You know, the fitness industry is huge for them as well. I think the other thing that can come with that, and you've mentioned this, but I thought it was really, really important, is that guilt and shame around eating. Whether that's binge eating or whether it's not binge eating. And I almost feel like sometimes that guilt and shame, even if you're not binge eating, can drive you towards it. Because you can't talk about it, you're continuously filled with that guilt and shame, and it makes things worse. It makes that relationship more and more unhealthy. And I think it's wonderful that you have that insight on a personal level, because I can imagine that it creates such empathy with the people that you work with. Because for so many of us, to go and see a nutritionist, for example, feels very scary. And I've spoken to nutritionists before who take this very much, well, just put the food down attitude. Put the down. And you know, that's not going to help someone to understand why they're eating in the way they're eating or feel any better, right? If you're driven by guilt and shame and someone tells you, you know, you're terrible, you know, put down the cookies, then you're just worse about yourself. You're not going to reach a healthier place.
That's such a great point that you actually mentioned, because I feel like a lot of people feel intimidated to see nutritionists, and I think because nutritionists may come across as like being perfect and, you know, they look a certain way. But I feel like also nutritionists and dietitians and everything, and naturopaths too, I feel like they've kind of got a hidden disordered way of eating as well. And I think they're probably a bit more bigger than what anyone else is, but they don't realize it because it's kind of like they just put this persona. It's just because I've had so many chats to other nutritionists, and because I'm a bit open on my socials, I'll have like literally personal trainers or nutritionists reach out and just be like, oh my God, that post that you mentioned, like that's just what I go through. But because, you know, we're qualified, we feel like this massive shame about that. But not many people know that part of it though. But yeah, a lot of people do like get intimidated to see a nutritionist, and you know, they just have that embarrassment. But it's also, that's what I mean with black and white nutrition and having that approach, because that just, you know, especially if they're saying like nutritionist after nutritionist, and then another nutritionist saying, no, don't do this and don't do that, or just have this, then they just get into this deeper cycle, and they're just like, oh, I don't know what to do anymore, like screw this, I don't want to do this anymore. And then their health literally just keeps deteriorating over time, like mentally, emotionally, and physically, because they haven't had that support, but with a bit of compassion to help them through that. And I think it's really important just to simply just listen to someone, meet them where they are, and then just work through it together, so they don't feel like they're being judged, and there's that space where they can just be themselves.
That's why I'm really interested in the work that you're doing, because you bring that compassion. Something that you mentioned there is impact that kind of studying nutrition had on your headspace around food. And I wanted to know a little bit more about how your kind of career and education in nutrition, whether from a positive or a negative perspective, has impacted your well-being journey.
It's been interesting because, and I think just because I've gone through the whole like being really strict because that's what I thought I had to do, and then binging and eating all sorts of foods and not really knowing the in between part. But you see, my journey started when I was really early. You know, I've had autoimmune conditions since I was 15, and so I got taught nutrition really early, and so for me, when I got taught that, it was by a naturopath, and she was really good, but she was really strict. But in my head, because I'm like, oh, I don't ever want to feel that sick again, I just got really fixated that this is what I had to do. So I literally cut out grains and, you know, dairy and all that. And so it was literally just a bit of meat and some veg and things. And everything had to be organic. It couldn't be anything else. And so it was like really strict, and I didn't go out to cafes or anything because I'm like, oh my God, I don't know where the meat's from. I don't know where the veggies are from. And it got to a point where like I didn't even go out socially. Like I remember I missed my brother's birthday because I was just like in this strict protocol. Like I had to be in bed by 9, get up at 5, train, and then just eat super clean. And it was really messy. So then when I went to uni to study, then they brought in their really strict, rigid views on nutrition. And when I was, it could be different for everyone else, but when I was studying, it was all about being vegan, and that's it. It was just like, if you're, you know, outside of being a vegan, then there's something wrong with you. And, you know, it was really strict. So we did get taught nutrition, but some of the lecturers were just really heavy on their views. And I'm kind of like, well, this is, why is everyone in my industry like so biased about like one way? Like, why can't they just have this open mind? And yeah, just have an open mind about nutrition and have balance, not, you know, just restriction. So then that left me feeling even more confused, because I'm like, why are they so strict for? Like, I'm just not understanding. And then once I got out of uni, or I had finished, I kind of just started to realize, that's when I really started to realize I was binge eating, and I hadn't really been aware of it until I just had episodes of it. And so then I just did my own study and my own research, and I was looking up at people and just, you know, reading their information. And there was quite a few people that helped shape me what I am today and why I think the way that I think. But it was just, by the end of it, I'm just like, I just want balance. I don't want strictness. I don't want deprivation. I don't want, you know, you got to avoid this and you got to avoid that, and thinking like food's bad, and, you know, just all sorts of silly things. So for me, it just helped me to shape, just to have that balance and to make it work for you so you can actually stick with. I mean, it's ridiculous how many people can't actually stick to a diet, and there's a reason for that, because it just doesn't work for them and it actually works against them. So that's why for me, I'm kind of like, no, as I said just before, like, you just need to meet where that person is, help them to work through it. Because for me, that's what when I reached out to help with my binge eating, that's what my mentor did for me. And I'm kind of like, wow, this is the first person, like the first nutritionist that like just helped me to look at food as a 360, not just like this one blindsided view. So that really helped shape me a lot, and which is why I work the way that I do. So yeah.
The point you mentioned about restriction is really, really interesting to me, because I think so often, whether it's with food, whether it's with exercise, we have this sense of the fact that extreme control equals health.
Yeah.
And it's bizarre when I mean, a number of kind of doctors that I've spoken to are in this area. So for example, Dr. Ivan Cohen was someone I interviewed on the platform a little while back, and he has founded a business that helps people who are kind of out of exercise or just getting into exercise to do it in a way that's kind of really, really helpful to them. And one of the things that he told me was that there are so many studies that show that you cannot get someone to embrace a healthy lifestyle if it's all about extreme kind of control and measures. Actually, the way to do it is to open people up and ease them into it. So it seems so bizarre to me what you're describing, which I think is very true, which is that, you know, so much of the education that people receive, especially around nutrition, is, you know, this way or the highway, rather than kind of really understanding what people need. Do you think that sense of kind of fear or reaction to control and restriction is one of the most common reasons that people come to see you, or people struggle with their nutrition? Or are there other reasons that you see more commonly?
That's a big one, the restriction, because they just get bombarded saying you've got to cut out dairy, you've got to cut out gluten, and you know, you've got to cut out all these food groups. But then they're like, I don't know what to eat anymore, and so then they just have, you know, they just end up blowing out on anything and everything. But they're also, even though they've tried so many diets, they still feel so stuck and lost and confused on what to do. So generally the few things that I see, and it's like with everyone's nutrition plan that I review, they're always too low in calories. So when, let's just say, you know, a lot of them go to personal trainers to, you know, to lose weight and stuff, like to give them a training plan and all that. But and even the stuff online, like from certain influencers, like they'll download an ebook, and the calories always tend to be so low, and they're so low, like, you know, it'll either be 1200 or 800 or something. I've even seen 500 calories, and like a lot of people don't understand that is way too low, especially 1200. Like, the reason why they put the calories so low is so that then that person can get results and then be used as a testimonial to then keep remarketing their program. But low calories is what sets people up for failure, because they feel so starving all the time, and they're like, oh, there must be something wrong. Why am I always so hungry? I'm like, because it's just too low. It also impacts their hormone levels. Like, a lot of times girls don't get their period. Now, when I used to do sports nutrition, when I first started KK, I seen a lot of girls that literally did not get their period for months, and it's simply because they were just far too low in their calories for such a lengthy time, which is really sad, because they don't actually realize the long-term effects, like, you know, if they want to have a baby and things like that. You know, removing food groups, as I mentioned before, even skipping meals is a big one. Like, a lot of them feel like they need to skip meals, and because intermittent fasting has been such a big thing the last few months, everyone feels like they need to do it, and it's this amazing thing. But I'm like, well, if it's gonna, a lot of the times especially with binge eaters and disordered ways of eating, like, that actually sets them up for failure, because they'll starve themselves till, like, God knows how long, and then by the time they can smell the food and just even like put one bite in their mouth, it just turns into they're raiding the pantry and the freezer, and then they'll go to, you know, the service station and get more junk food, and so it just doesn't work for them. And also a really big one, and I don't think because it gets taught that much, but having structure with their meals, like, because they're getting told, you know, do keto, it's only fat, minimal protein and carbs, or, you know, or it could just be just focus on your protein and don't worry about anything else. And so when they eat, it's not structured and balanced, and so they're only having like one food group, but that never leaves them feeling satisfied, and then their cravings go out of control, and then they end up feeling moody, tired, and, you know, sometimes constipated, and they just don't feel the best. So for me, it's helping them to understand how to balance their meals appropriately, but in a way that supports them. But then it's kind of funny, because then they get scared because they're like, oh, but if I eat this and it's going to make me fat, and so it's helping them to then unlearn all the food and diet rules, and then relearning because a lot of people don't actually know what's normal anymore, because there's just so much extreme out there. So, but they're like pretty much the 4 common things that I see people come to me for, and the issues that I see when it comes to nutrition and reviewing, you know, their meal plan. It's just crazy to see.
It's what it sounds like to me, and definitely something that I'm aware of kind of in my own life with other women and men that I know, is that there's this kind of very unhealthy relationship with food going on for sort of lots of different reasons in lots of different ways. How do you think that, from a kind of societal perspective, what is it that we need to do to change this?
I think we just need to, I guess, stop being so biased in our views, and not just that, but having a balance. Like, and what kills me the most is when people pull out studies and just read like the tiny conclusion, but don't actually read the actual like study. And you know, I mean, there's so many pages inside a study that they just take one little part because it's just what they want to hear, and then they just promote it and make it, you know, it's just, I guess, not being so biased, having an open mind, but, you know, actually genuinely helping people, because I feel like the weight loss industry is more about profits over people, and I find that really sad, because there's no integrity behind it. So it's kind of like, if they kind of cared enough, they would be teaching about balance and, you know, balanced eating behaviors, and making it work so it's sustainable for them, so they're not always falling off the bandwagon. Because I don't think people actually realize why they make it so strict is because it just keeps them coming back for more. And so you'll often find, like, even influencers, and I'm not trying to bag them out in any way, but you know, when you see them promoting a new diet each and every week, like, there's a reason for that, because it's like trendy to go on a new diet each week. But that's what's kind of, and having a, you know, bit more regulation with people, because I mean, you can just be like some random on the road and just, you know, splurt out all these nutrition things, and people will literally listen, especially when they're in such a desperate state, which I find really sad. You know, you can say something that really, you know, random, but if it's going to appeal to that desperate person, they're going to do whatever it takes. So I think regulation around that, but also having a system where, yeah, there's better education. It's more about balance and not so much a black and white approach, which I just think my industry is about. Like, it's always black and white. So yeah, I think from my perspective, I just think I'm more of an open-minded, balanced approach.
Completely. And we've touched now quite a bit on your approach. But I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more in depth when people come to you with concerns around their nutrition or their relationship to food, what
Yeah.
can they expect from you?
I think it's, for me, it's just, you know, I'm literally just holding their hand through the whole journey. So when they come to me, it's like there's a lot of support, there's a lot of education, there's a lot of guidance. As I've said a few times, I don't want them to feel judged in any way. Like, you know, they can be themselves and have that space so they can, you know, share and be open and honest about what they're going through. But for me, it's more importantly, the two most important things is support and having that compassion for people, because a lot of the times they haven't been heard by anyone, and simply just listening and being there for them is literally a huge, you know, how many times like my clients have cried on me, especially like when they first meet me, like they'll literally cry and then they'll share like something really deep and powerful. Like, I've had clients share with me and they've never said it to anyone else. Like, you know, they've been sexually assaulted or raped, or, you know, they had an abortion when they were younger, and these are things that they haven't been able to tell anyone else, but in the first session they have. But I think that's just because listening is just a big part of it. But yeah, probably the main ones is just support, compassion, education, and just really being there for them, because I have to put myself in their perspective. Like, there are no silly questions because they're still trying to learn about nutrition, and because they're so bombarded by so many different things, they don't even know what to do. So there's no silly questions. It's just about them having that space to learn, and then thrive for the remainder of their life, and use this as a space where it can be sustainable, practical. And it's cool because you get to see the transformation, not just like physically, but also mentally and emotionally, because from where they were to where they are now, or who they were to who they are now, they've finally, you know, it's kind of like, you know, they've just grown into this beautiful butterfly and they can finally be themselves. So I think for me, that's a big part. And also like accountability, because I feel like a lot of the times people don't actually believe in themselves. And so I think that's a big one. And I think a lot of people doubt themselves. So for me, it's helping them to see that they can do this. It is possible to overcome this battle, or, you know, to reach a healthy weight, or whatever it is that their goals are, and just, keep them accountable and remind them, hey, like, you can do this. Don't doubt yourself. You just got to take the small steps over and over and over again until it becomes normal, because they've been in these patterns and habits for such a long time, that they're just in their comfort zone. So helping them to kind of break out of that and you know, really embrace who they are is, yeah, it's really cool. So in a nutshell, that's pretty much what I do and what they can expect.
It's such a unique and really beautiful approach, because to me it seems what you're really tapping into is not just the kind of scientific side of nutrition, but actually how deeply our emotional state impacts the way that we approach food. Um, I wanted to explore that a little bit more, because I think that's a really, really important one. Can you tell us a little bit about what the relationship is between our mental health and the way that we eat?
I think it has a huge connection and a huge relationship. You know, I guess when I'm working with clients, like for them, because of how they've been programmed, because of their eating habits, they're literally sabotaging themselves. Like every time they feel stressed, or they've got anxiety or depression or whatever it is that might be, or something in their day triggers them, or they might have multiple triggers every day and it just really affects their mental health. Then they start to use food, and mostly foods that are like junk food and high as sugars and fats, like junk food and stuff, thinking that that's what's going to help them, but it's just helping them to get through that moment of their anxiety or of that little stress. But then the aftermath is 10 times bigger than what their anxiety is actually going through, and like they know that, but then they don't know how to break out of that part where it's like, oh, how can I deal with my stress where I'm not using food as a coping mechanism, so then I don't have to keep sabotaging myself over and over and over again because they feel like they've lost control. So I feel like the connection with food and mental health is huge, because a lot of what I do is helping them to reprogram their subconscious mind, because our day is run literally 95% of our subconscious mind, and that's based on that's making all our choice, or most of our choices, our decisions and our actions. So imagine if someone is always in that anxious stress state and then always using food, especially overeating and cravings and binging like all the time, and especially having so much junk food over a period of time, like it's going to really affect not just their mind but also their physical body. Like they're going to feel like they're always tired all the time, they've got no energy, there's no motivation. Like even just when they wake up in the morning, like, oh, like I really can't be bothered getting out of bed, I don't want to face my day. And they kind of like they've just lost themselves in that process. Whereas if they kind of learn how to change their behaviors and dealt with their stress in a more empowering way, then they could, I guess, have more of a calmer, clearer mind, and they would feel good on the inside as well as on the outside too. And then they would be able to start making better choices just naturally, and they'll start to feel good as well. And I think that's really important. But I think because what happens is with nutrition, because it's so focused on weight and, I guess just weight only, they kind of forget about health and how that impacts them. So, or they focus on the scale and the number. So I think it just has a huge connection, the two of them.
The point you made there about learning how to manage your anxiety or your stress or whatever it is that you're going through in another way, I think is so key. It's certainly something that on a personal level, food and I have always had a little bit of an uncomfortable relationship, or for many, many years. And it was only when I kind of learned how to manage my stress and kind of look at it slightly differently, and find ways to soothe myself that weren't solely related to food, that my relationship to food started to improve. But what I would say is that, of course, there are still moments throughout life where you'll experience that. It's just, I suppose, about forgiving yourself and learning how to manage the subsequent stress.
I just wanted to make a point, because you mentioned a really great point, and I really wanted to clarify it too, because, a lot of, the odd binge or emotional eat here and there is like completely normal. Like I do it, we all do it, like that's completely normal. But I think it just I think it just becomes a little unhealthy when that person is like literally, binge eating hard, like multiple times a day, every single day. And it's to the point where it's like, it's literally taken over their life, and they're so trapped by food that they literally start hibernating. It's just, or they're locked in their room, and it's just literally work and room, and that's it. But it's kind of like, if it's like a Christmas day, or you're gonna bound to overeat, like that's normal. You have this, some bit of a stress, and it's like, oh, who cares, I'll just eat some ice cream. But and that's completely normal. But it's just when it's like every single day, and it's taking over their whole entire life, where they just can't see a way out, and they feel so trapped and stuck in there. And so I just wanted to clarify that, because I don't want people to think, oh my God, do I have, my binge eating now? So I just wanted to clarify that, because that was a great point that you mentioned.
It goes back to the point that you made earlier around kind of shame and guilt, right? It is normal to overeat sometimes. Like if you want to have a pizza and ice cream for dinner every now and
Yeah.
then, that's okay, and that's not going to mess up your body and your mind for forever
that's
and
right.
ever. But I think the problem is that, especially if you're someone like me who has a history of kind of an unhealthy relationship with food and eating disorders, the minute that you take that step, your mind goes to that place where you're like, now everything's over and this is going to be it forever. So it's kind of, I think doing what you do and helping people to develop those emotional tools for both before they get to that moment and afterwards is so helpful, because they're so key. But it's sometimes there are still, I guess, moments where they won't always work. And I feel like if we're in places of high anxiety, for example, it's very difficult not to give in to I guess impulse is the wrong word, but to kind of an unhealthy behavior and habits. And obviously at the moment, we're all in one of the kind of most high anxiety, high stress situations I think any of us have ever been in with this pandemic. And I know on a personal level, I found myself slipping into kind of unhealthy habits as a result, as a reaction to that stress. But I wanted to explore with you a little bit more whether you've seen kind of, whether that's universal and you've seen a rise in people struggling with that and their nutrition during the current lockdown.
There's been I've noticed there's like two sides of this. Like for some people, it's actually given them an opportunity to take a deep dive into their health, and they're just being like, oh wow, I need to, I want to take some time. That's actually been beneficial for them being at home, because it's like from they've had a break, and for them it's worked. But for a lot of people, because there's probably they're feeling lonely, or they're bored, or they're out of their routine, and being in lockdown, they probably feel like trapped and like, oh my god, like I can't go anywhere, and so for them to kind of just have that comfort, food's always going to be there, and food comforts you like really quickly, like within seconds you're like, oh, my anxiety's gone, or I'm not feeling lonely anymore. But as I said, the aftermath's always what hits people, with the shame and the guilt that comes with it. But I think also in this kind of a time, like we've never lived in a time like this. We've never, I mean, for I guess my generation, our generation, it's just, I never thought that I'd be living in something like this myself, in being in a pandemic. But I think it's super important, if anyone that is struggling with their nutrition during this time, and like they find themselves always overeating, is not to judge themselves and not to be so hard on themselves. I mean, like we're living in a pandemic, like that's hard enough, and you don't know their situation, if they've lost their job or they're by themselves or whatever it is. So there's a lot of emotions going about. But what I will say is, if it's getting to a point where it's really impacting you even more, to kind of just find ways that they can help themselves through it. So, a big one that I always teach everyone is like, just create that self-awareness. Like, how does that make you feel with what you're doing? I understand what your triggers are, and have that compassion for yourself, so then you can slowly shift those habits. Because if they've been happening for such a long time, and that it's really making an even bigger impact than what it was at the start, then it's a good idea to make some changes, but do it in a way where you're not, going to extremes, or you're being so hard on yourself, like, why can't you do this? Like, you're at home, it should be easier. But it's just, becoming aware of what you're doing, how it makes you feel. And then as you connect with those two, because I always feel like there's a disconnection between how they think and how they feel, and then their actions. So if they can really connect with what they're thinking, how they're feeling, then that can help them with what they're about to do. So for example, if they're feeling I guess sad or anxious because they're trapped in home again, they can just, and they're wanting to binge, and it's kind of like, okay, I know, how am I going to feel when I do this? Is this something that I really want to eat now? And in an hour's time, how is that going to make me feel? And then based on that, then they can kind of help themselves through that and just make decisions. So I guess instead of eating like a whole packet of cookies, they can, during that process, they'll just have 2 cookies instead of the whole packet, because they've become aware why they're eating, what their triggers are, and it makes such a big difference. So I think, yeah, it's normal to what they're experiencing, but I guess if it's making that huge impact, then those two questions in itself is just makes a huge impact on, making better choices for themselves, so then they can actually feel good, because you want to be feeling good as much as you can, not the opposite. Because I call them like little win streaks. So if it can help that person to be on little win streaks, they got up, they're breathing, they're alive, just taking advantage of like just the smallest things, and then, asking those two questions can make such a big impact during such a difficult time.
I can completely attest to that. I think it's sometimes just taking a moment to take stock and reconnect with
Yeah.
yourself and why you're approaching things in the way that you are, that can really, really help to kind of
Yeah.
overcome a habit that's hurting you, essentially. And that connection, and that ability to recognize that connection between your emotional state and your actions, is that the kind of key step that you would recommend to people in general, regardless of the situation we're going through at the moment, in terms of improving their approach to food, or are there other steps that you would recommend that people can take?
That's a pretty big one, because the first thing that I get my clients to do is do like a food journal, because a lot of the times with people who have disordered eating or binge eating, or even yo-yo dieting, they're not completely honest with themselves, and they don't understand, they're not really connected with their thoughts and their actions, and a lot of their eating patterns are literally on autopilot. Like, I call it eating amnesia, because they'll remember 2 meals, but then they don't remember the in-between meals of all of that. They literally don't remember. And because they've eaten so much and so fast, it's just like, oh my God, I can't believe I've just eaten all this food. I didn't even know what happened. It's kind of like this out-of-body experience. So the biggest part in the first phase is literally just connecting with what they're doing, how it makes them feel, and that food journal, because they're finally being honest with themselves and they're looking at the facts, they can be like, holy crap, Cal, I had no idea I was going to, the petrol station and buying all this junk food on the way home, or I wasn't realizing that I was just having tubs of ice cream like each and every night, and I'd wake up with like this food hangover. And so they start to see patterns that they couldn't see before. And I think that's a really important connection first before you make any nutrition recommendations, because a lot of people just go straight to the meal plan, or straight to this nutrition protocol, and here's a PDF. But the truth is, people aren't going to be following that PDF file. And it doesn't matter how good your nutrition plan is, doesn't matter how customized it is, that person is just not going to follow it. So the first phase is just literally helping them become aware of themselves, how they feel, of their actions. And then you move to, certain nutrition protocols. I'm very intuitive, so I still do one-to-one coaching. So it's just based on what the client's going through. But yeah, before you touch any form of nutrition, you need to become aware of what's actually going on, and with an honest view, and not just writing it down so then you can show your nutritionist the good stuff. It's like, no, let's just be honest about everything, so then you can actually work through these, because it's happening for a reason. Like, there's a reason why you're binging. Like, before you're binge eating, there's a trigger that triggered you to binge eat. So we need to become aware of that, what the reasons are behind it, which I think is so powerful. And it's a lot of the work that not many people want to do, because it brings up so much pain, so much shame, so much embarrassment. But in order for someone to make a proper change that's going to benefit them as a whole, you need to be doing that work, which is why there's a lot of support with me, because I know what it's like to go through that process, because it's what I had to go through. And if I hadn't had that support, then I don't know if I would be where I'm at today. So yeah, it's a big part of my program, that's for sure.
That makes so much sense. And I think being able to develop that awareness, and also having that support to do so, is really, really important to getting on a kind of good track with your relationship to your body and food.
Yeah.
Thing that was quite helpful to me on that journey to find a sort of better relationship with my body and food was doing a lot of kind of reading and research, and also finding online communities and forums where I felt safe to either express or just take in information that resonated with me about taking a different approach to food in my body. Are there any resources that have inspired your approach to nutrition, or you would recommend to others to help with theirs?
There's a few resources. My very first mentor, his name's Anthony Noud, and he's from Awaken Lifestyles, and his work is just incredible. I mean, if it wasn't for him, I don't know if I would be where I'm at today, like just mentally, emotionally, and physically. And he does a lot of inner work stuff as well. And like just his information that he has is just next level. And it's so inspiring to have, who talks about real stuff, real mental health. And his stuff's amazing. I can't begin to tell you how much amazing his stuff is. So Anthony Noud, and the second one is I think I'm going to pronounce her second name wrong, but her name's Gabrielle Fandaro. She's got a PhD in dietetics and nutrition, and she's probably one of the few dietitians who are like really level-headed and don't have like a black and white view on nutrition. And she talks a lot about having a healthy relationship with food, and it's just really cool to see that instead of having a black and white approach. And probably the third one is Lane Norton. He's also got a PhD in nutrition, and he's like he just breaks down science into the most simplest things, but he's all about keeping it real. He pulls out a lot of the myths out there too, so you're not feeling confused about nutrition. So yeah, those three people have probably had the most significant impact on me and my journey with my relationship with food. And I hope whoever checks out the resources, it helps them too, because they've got a lot of free information on their social media handles, and you'll get so much benefit from it. So yeah, they're the three people.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you so much for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure to have you.
Oh no, thank you for having me. It's been really cool. This has been a really lovely chat.
Absolutely.
And I hope it can help people too. So yeah.
Absolutely.